So good morning, everybody, and welcome to the third in this trilogy of webinars from Dafferns. First webinar back in May was all about survival. And the second webinar, which was June, moved on from that, working towards coming out of lockdown. And then this is the third part where we're actively looking at what your business needs to do to thrive. Versions of this presentation have been run all over the world. They started in Australia, and I heard on the radio this morning that Melbourne has now gone back into a mandatory 6-week lockdown, very similar to the rules that we had in the UK back in March. Benefits of Dafferns Business Leader Groups. It's all about one-to-one advisory support where either Richard Miller, who's my partner who's on screen with us at the moment, or myself will work with you on a one-to-one basis. On a quarterly basis, you have the opportunity to peer network with other Business Leader Group members, to share ideas and strategies, discuss what's working with you and what's working with them. But in between, 24/7 coaching on MyTrip Online. So Richard, over to you.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Martin, for the introduction. Just give you a quick overview of what we're looking to cover. For those Business Leader Group members, they have access to, as Martin mentioned, the online growth learning and development platform called MyTrip Online. And so I'll spend just a couple of minutes going through sort of the latest releases. And also the focus for this webinar today is to be, how are we going to be best placed to thrive as we emerge from lockdown and the crisis itself. So Martin will then take us through roadmap through the crisis, really just getting some feedback as to where we think individual businesses are and what the challenges they're facing. So what we're going to be doing today, a couple of things. We're looking at how business and team structures will need to evolve in a sort of post-COVID world. And of those things that we've adapted by necessity, which of those things will be quite nice if we actually allow them to stick rather than just treating it as a sort of temporary adaptation within the business model. We'll then look at how and where you will thrive post-COVID-19. And part of that is actually looking at the sustainable income. What are the products and services we're offering into the marketplace? And then we'll put it all together, actions from the day, what take-home points you've got. So quick update on MyTrip Online. 1st of July, for you, there's quite a large update on MyTrip Online. There are new search facilities. So if you've got an issue that you want to look at, call up courses and tools in the toolbox that will help you for any particular problem you're facing. So I thought what I'd do is just take you through one of the tools which has been updated called vision mapping. The idea being is that if you wanted to put a bit more flesh on the bones as to the vision for the business, where you wanted to get to, there was this very useful checklist, which was addressing sort of 5 core areas of the business. So these are finance, market, products and services, people and passion. So I recommend this to you because what's happened is that there's been an updated version launched on the website and a downloadable handout, which is Vision post-COVID-19. So it's tailored to the kind of questions that you need to be asked. For example, on the finance side, we've got growth. So, in the new normal, what are our growth targets? Do we consolidate? Do we still go for growth? If we're going for growth, where does that growth come from? What level of profitability will we target? Is that going to be markedly different to what we had previously? Funding, how we fund growth and innovation. How will we ensure we have a strong balance sheet? Today, we're going to be looking at how leadership needs to change and also what sort of evolving business and team structures we'll have. Other tools that we're pointing people in the direction of, issue ranking is a really good way of actually setting priority. The question as to where do we focus our efforts? What are the most important things? One-page business plan. I was running a webinar last week actually, and going back to basic problem-solving skill is really useful for businesses at this particular point in time. Some of them have been knocked out of their strategic planning process and they're just seeing issues that need to be resolved. So some of the core tools that we start people with on the problem-solving side are really good to just reinforce. Having done that catch up, I'll hand back over to Martin.
It's a big question, isn't it? Where are we now? Because it's now July, people are starting to reopen factories, reopen offices, and hopefully we are starting to come out of the lockdown phase, but we don't know where the road is going and we don't ultimately know what's around the corner. Back in March, we began working with this roadmap showing you 3 scenarios, 3 levels of severity, which down the left-hand side, some businesses were still busy. Then there's businesses where there was low impact, maybe up to a 20% reduction in sales and drop off in orders. And then there were other businesses, particularly the retail sector, which had a very, very high impact. What businesses needed to do to be reacting to the COVID crisis in each of the phases, and the 3 phases that we identified was the initial one, which was survive, and then pivot, adapt, and finally thrive, was different depending on the degree to which their business had been impacted. Certainly during the survive phase, well, it may still be going on for a lot of businesses. Certainly there was a lot of activity the back end of March, April and May with furloughing, bounce back loans, CBILS loans. There was a point towards the end of May where it's calculated that over 50% of the UK working population were effectively either employed by or paid by the government. Businesses at that stage were really focusing on survive. If you remember at the time, it seemed everybody was doing webinars. Everybody was hoovering up as much information as they could possibly get and trying to work out what was going on and what they needed to do, what buttons they needed to press to enable their business to survive. And that was certainly the focus of the first of our webinars. As we started to get into May and approaching June, what became apparent to lots of businesses is they needed to change their business model. The business had been going for 10 years and it had built up its turnover and taken 10 years to build up a customer base. If they were badly hit by coronavirus, they may be losing big chunks of their turnover. They can't wait another 10 years to build up their turnover again. So business models needed to change, businesses needed to adapt, but it isn't easy. You need to have a plan, you need to spot the opportunity, and you need to work through in a very detailed, careful way how you're going to do that. And the tools and resources that we've got available on MyTrip Online are an ideal way for any business to be plotting and working out exactly how they're going to do it. A lot of the stuff on MyTrip Online involves using tools and diagnostics, and certainly a conversation without using a tool is just a chat. That by using a tool, you have a focused conversation and you have a document at the end of it which evidences where you've got to and what the next step in the plan is, something you can then share with colleagues. But certainly back at the start of May, we were starting to see businesses getting into this pivot adapt phase. They'd gone through the initial crisis survival, and then they were starting to look at how they can readapt their businesses. The pivot adapt phase, potentially it could be 3 to 6 months. And the third phase, which is what today's webinar is really looking at, is the thrive element. It's very difficult to actually say which businesses are going to thrive and when they're going to thrive, because vast numbers of our clients are still really in survival mode and still struggling with pivoting and adapting and trying to work forward. But we're now getting to a point whereby the whole of the UK economy needs to start thinking about thrive. They need to start thinking about the return to profitability and the return to positive cash flow. I'm actually up in the Peak District in Derbyshire at the moment. And to get up here, we have to drive through Chesterfield. And the Chatsworth Road out of Chesterfield has got a large number of small independent shops all barricaded up. And it really highlights the level to which small businesses, and particularly retail businesses, have been hit in the current crisis. And for the whole UK economy, we all need to be planning forward and working out. We may not be able to thrive and we may not be able to make profit at the moment, but we need a roadmap to get us to the point where businesses can start, maybe later this year, maybe early part of next year. Every business will have a different timeline as they're looking at this. But this is really an opportunity to hear from some of you guys as to how your businesses have been navigating through the current COVID environment. I'm going to ask John Rimmer. Hi, John. So John's an insolvency practitioner from BRI. How are you finding the business market at the moment?
Hi, Martin. Hi, Richard. Thanks for inviting us on. I think in terms of the business market, very, very mixed. Some are really struggling, continuing to struggle, and others are starting to come out the other side and seeing positive improvements. The ones that are struggling are the ones we all read about in the press, that are still shouting. You know, hairdressers have only just reopened, but your pubs, your restaurants, they're partially open now, but with social distancing measures, to sit an entire restaurant at only half full and still make profit, very, very tough. We've spoken to travel companies where they're concerned about the significant level of deposits that they're holding, and will the landlords of the properties want to keep those or pay them back? Will the customers even want to go on holiday? So a real mixed bag, really. Nobody's had it easy, that's for sure.
Yes, John, thanks for that. I mean, we're definitely seeing within Dafferns client base a real mixture. Those of you who were with us last time, would have heard from Ian Jamie from Steger Clear Packaging, one of our clients, who was telling us all about how his business had pivoted and adapted their model from being manufacturers of clear plastic packaging for the food industry and had moved over to being major suppliers of PPE.
One of the core parts of Business Leader Group or Growth Academy in the past has been the opportunity to get away and we can introduce you to sort of new ideas or ideas of best practice. And when we talk about people being able to achieve change, one of the big elements within that is building the capability both of the organisation but of the people within it. That talk about how we actually evolve our business and team structures moving forward. And it could be that the actual business structure and the way we're operating as teams may have had to adapt. But the question is what of that has worked and what are we going to do to actually make it stick and make our business more effective and efficient as a result of that? So the first one is we often refer to articles from McKinsey's. And this is an article that appeared in May 2020. The article was entitled, "From Thinking About the Next Normal to Making It Work." And so a lot of people having a lot of ideas. And the question was, they talked to a number of business leaders across the world, and they did some research. And what they came back with was a sort of 7-point plan of the kind of things that if we want to make this work, what we need to do. First one is in relation to what they call from sleeping at the office to effective remote working. And the key thing they say here is that you cannot assume that we're going to go back to the old ways. I mean, Martin earlier on said, the genie's out of the bottle now. And so I was talking to a number of clients of mine, and a lot of them were quite pleasantly surprised to a certain extent. There was a guy based down in Devon who runs a manufacturing business, and he was saying he was quite surprised how effectively the remote working had improved the way they actually communicated and stuff was done. We need to stop assuming that we're going to go back to the old way, that somehow, this is just a blip and we'll just go back to an old way of working, because you can guarantee your competitors won't. Probably what kept us going in the early part was the necessity of having to do it and a certain amount of adrenaline. And what we're saying now is that you need to think about how you actually organise your work for what we're going to call a distributed workforce. So those people working in different locations, which may include people working from home. And in the old way of working, we knew where we stood. So we went into the office at a certain point in time, we'd interact with other people, and then we'd leave the office. And so one of the things that the McKinsey article says is that you've got to think about how you actually organise the way people work now to give them that framework and that structure. Now, some companies are looking at sort of virtual workspaces. So if you've got a sort of a mentor and a mentee effectively working in the same virtual space. There was another example that I heard of from the article. Effectively, it was saying some people were creating sort of random phone calls whereby you had 5 minutes and you would talk to someone else within the organisation, which was meant to replicate the idea of you walking down the office and you bump into someone while you're making a cup of coffee. A lot of people have had the benefit of greater flexibility. Trello is another one that has really taken off as a collaboration tool. There's one particular charity client that I'm working with at the moment, and in the period of lockdown, they've had 3 new people start, and they've had online virtual inductions by using Trello. Second point was, and this is a point that we come back to a lot and will develop further, is the idea of going away from lines and silos to networks and teamwork. So it's an evolution in the way that we work, and I think what's happened is that the coronavirus crisis has effectively accelerated that move away from an old way of organising ourselves. People who are actually making decisions more quickly, it's often that they are doing so within teams and within project groups. So there is no longer the need, and there isn't the time necessarily for people to make decisions from a hierarchical point of view. And so if things are working well, it's a question, how do we lock in that practice to make sure that it's effective as possible? And then the other thing is acceleration of the transition to agility. And I bang on about agility all the time. It's effectively a way of bringing about change, responding to the needs and providing value to your customer, responding to the needs and maximizing impact. And how do we do that whilst minimizing risk? And Agile frameworks are very much focused in terms of creating value and protecting value as part of what we do. So I really recommend that article. It's about 11 pages long, but it's great if you're actually thinking about the stuff that you want to stick. Next article that I'll draw to your attention is basically an article on LinkedIn. This is from Darryl Cross, and Darryl Cross is a MyTrip member over in Australia. He's also a qualified psychologist. So if you're doing any of the training courses on the MyTrip Online platform, the self-confidence course or the newly released personal resilience course, you'll see Darryl. Anything that he says is well worth listening. So this is an extract from an article that Darryl put up on LinkedIn, which was quite nicely entitled "Never Waste a Good Crisis," apparently, which was a quote from Winston Churchill. And his point there is that often what you'll find is, from a historical context where we've had crises in the past, it's been an opportunity to improve and change. And the example he's using here is that effectively leadership needs to change. He's basically saying it was broken anyway. We had an old-fashioned, what we call command and control way of dealing with things. And what he's saying is that you need to, within this new working environment, leadership needs to change to more of what we call motivate and mentor. And one of the things he says is that you cannot effectively have a foot in both camps. So we encourage you, and this is a good article to sort of share with your board, share with your managers in terms of the role they need to take as they move forward. There was the old 19th and 20th century traditional approach of sort of command and control. So that was characterized by top-down hierarchy. So you had the board or the owners on top that effectively would determine the strategy, and they would basically pass it down through the organization chart, through all the lines of responsibility. And what the 21st century approach is, very much as I mentioned on Agile, is everything is driven by what provides value to the customer. And that changes. There's also a greater emphasis in terms of what we call customer journeys. We used to talk about customer service. There's been a lot of talk in the last 3 to 5 years or so about what we call customer success. And the whole idea of customer success is that if someone is going to use us as a service provider or buy our products, then we actually have an obligation to make sure that they can maximize the value that they're going to get either from that product or from the relationship. So change from functional specializations, so again within the organization chart, to the idea of cross-functional teams. Individual rewards, team-based rewards, the idea of a command and control leader telling people what to do, to the idea of what we call servant and coach. And one of the courses that I really recommend on the MyTrip Online platform, particularly for people growing within a role, is coaching and developing people. It's really good and really effective because the whole idea of a manager and a leader being the head coach. There's a great quote from Steve Vamos, who used to be part of the executive team of Microsoft, and then he's currently the chief executive of Xero. And he basically had a lot of knowledge, and when he first became a leader, he said, he thought he had to be the star player. People are promoted on the basis if I can do something, I'm good at what I do. But he came to the realization that it's not your role is not to be the star player. Your role is to be the head coach. So the idea is you're trying to get the best out of the people within your team. So those are a couple of articles in terms of team structure and business structure. How are we going to lock those things in as we move into the Thrive phase? The next one, which I'm going to take you through, is a tool we use with a lot of clients when they're trying to analyze both existing services, the portfolio of services they have, or products, and also thinking about what their strategies are for moving forward. So normally when we do product portfolio analysis, it's normally a 2-hour, at least 2-hour session with a team of people within the organization. And sometimes it's called the Boston Consulting Grid, but the idea is we analyze our existing products and services. And then what we try and do is we place them upon a grid, and that's on the basis of market attractiveness and business strength. And you'll have had a handout sent through to you yesterday, which is a more detailed step-by-step way of doing that. And I can help you moving forward, but we don't have time within this webinar to do that. But the phases are So based upon market attractiveness and business strength, we normally start within Wildcat. So what you might have is you've got something that's got high market attractiveness, but it's early stages for us. So we haven't actually been able to actually develop a position where we have business strength within the marketplace. So it's called a wildcat because it could go anywhere. But you'll find, well, new products will normally be wildcats. The idea is that we want to try and move the wildcat across into the star. So if it's attractive within the marketplace, the idea is that your strategy then is to actually build our capability for that product, for that service, build the business strength around it, so that it then becomes a star. So effectively, we can generate income from that. Next phase tends to be cash cow. So the idea being is that having created the star, how can we actually drive other people out of the marketplace so we become the dominant force? And then the dog is basically the end cycle, really, of the actual process itself. So in some respects, it's a bit like the product life cycle. So when you start off, you effectively introduce a new product. So the introduction phase might be the wildcat. We go through growth. We start generating income from it. It reaches maturity, and then it goes into decline. And so if you're looking at your existing products and services, you may have had a clear view pre-COVID as to where they were at. The question now is that what has happened as a result of COVID that might have changed your product portfolio analysis? And the question is, as a result of that, what are you going to do about it? So as I say, this is normally a sort of at least a 2-hour exercise, but what I'll do is I'll take you through an example. And this is an example with a retail store product portfolio. So on the left-hand side, we've got a matrix, which is pre-COVID-19. And then we've got on the right-hand side, post-COVID-19, which might be the strategies that you may take as an organization. So let's start off with the pre-COVID. So what we may find is that retail shops have been finding it really, really difficult. So if you think about the number of empty shops on the high street, what you may find is that a lot of the income was being generated in an area where it was low market attractiveness, and we may have low business strength because of the retail shops were in high areas. And the size of the circle might represent effectively the actual sort of proportion of our income that was coming from that source. So that was the sort of dog, which is probably the element that is then going into decline. We may have a bit of a cash cow, so it could be that we've got some retail shops that were in a low rent area, so therefore we were able to keep our costs to a minimum, and therefore there was a certain amount of cash generation and profit generation built within that. The next element may have been that we've started to establish an online sales presence. So it's a smaller circle there, it's a smaller amount. But we know there's high market attractiveness, but we're only part way through actually building our business strength. So we're only about 50% on the axis there. So that might be pre-COVID-19. So the question is, what's going to happen? How do we analyze, and what are the actions that we need to take post-COVID-19? So it could be that what we're saying is that we recognize that we've got a dog. What we might want to do is reduce the size of a dog, but also make it slightly more attractive to us, in that we might reduce the number of shops we've got on the high street, but there is a move more to sort of move these into smaller, what we call experiential shops. There's a lot of talk about user experience, UX, at the moment. So could it be that these are areas where we can actually test out different bits and pieces, but we have less in the way of profile and cost there. Cash cow, it could be that where we've got retail shops, if we can renegotiate rents, it means that we can generate more in the way of margin. So we might be able to actually then generate more income from that particular area. Online sales. So when we see on the left-hand side, online sales are quite a small proportion, and we were about halfway through in terms of business strength. So it could be the strategy actually is that we need to build our capability and build our business strength within that area. So what are the strategies we need to further persevere with an online model? And how do we actually grow the level of sales that we have within that? And then the last thing might be, we'll look for a new wildcat. So we've proved ourselves within with online sales. So perhaps let's try online sales in a new marketplace that we haven't tried before. And this is where the idea of agile working comes in terms of testing something quickly, reacting to changing circumstances. So that is a very quick overview. As I said, you've got the handout, and I'm quite happy. There's an offer from me that anybody wants to talk through that process. But ultimately, if you're going to thrive in the future, you've got to think as to where is the income going to be coming from? Where in the product life cycle are my existing products and services? And what do I need to do to ensure that I can thrive and generate income from an area that is not going to be dying? So really quick overview, but happy to expand that with anybody offline.
Just wondering, Elizabeth Kavanagh, who's with us from Small Piece. Can you hear me, Elizabeth? Hello there.
Yes.
So in the charitable sector, how has your organisation evolved through the crisis?
So I suppose just so that everyone realises, we do a lot of face-to-face residential courses. With COVID, we've not been able to do any of that because of social distancing. So what we've had to do is a bit around pivoting, really, is that we've had to go online. So one of our biggest funders, we've had to take effectively what we did, probably done 22 face-to-face courses. We're probably doing 60 online courses, one in the morning, one in the afternoon, for a whole week or 2 week period. So that's the piece that we've had to pivot and had to adapt quite quickly to. As an organisation, it was really new. We'd never done any online training at all, or monitoring, or even having to recruit to get children on those courses. So for us, that's been a real big swing around how do we use our people, what skills do we have, what do we need. From that, we decided it was time maybe for us to take a step out and actually do our own online courses. And we've worked with the universities, we've worked with our partners in industry to support us as well. And we're actually going to be delivering one of our own online courses with our own platform that we've been looking at. We've had to look, how can we deliver our courses still to the audience, which is young people, in a time when people are looking for those educational pieces. And it's also given us a platform to test as well and say, what can we do in the future? Because actually we might be in a situation where we might have to use online courses in our October period when we've got half term. Even in Easter next year, we don't know. Or there might be a blending of products now that says that we do some face-to-face and some online.
I imagine the blended learning model is definitely something which is going to be there moving forward, and things we've all had to swap over to. A lot of it is going to stick. I'm just wondering, Elizabeth, in terms of access to funding for your organisation, has that been impacted at all?
So from our organisational perspective, from a funding perspective, one of our biggest clients that we have on our portfolio were the ones that did go online. So our 60 courses. But what we did see is effectively that face-to-face is more expensive than online as well. So when you look at, did our funding go down? Yes, it did. But what it did also do is allow us to have funds in the organisation still to sustain us through a period of time of change with what we've got going on with lockdown, with coming out of COVID-19. We've had to look at it very differently, and we've had to sell a product slightly different to what we would normally do, which is probably out of our comfort zone at the moment, I would say. But we're learning. Other funders have said they will transfer the funds that we couldn't use this year into next year.
Yeah, it sounds as though a lot of the issues that you've had to face and adapt to are very similar to the ones that a huge number of organisations have had. What I will do, Elizabeth, is I'll put a link to the Small Piece website in the description to the video when it goes up. Mm-hmm. So anybody that's on the session today or anybody that's watching the video subsequently can go and have a look at your website. But thank you for your input there.
Actions from the day in summary. Where are we now, Martin? We're doing well. We've got about sort of 4 or 5 minutes left. So
we're almost on time, aren't we?
We are almost on time. So if you identify those top 3 things you're going to work on, share them with me. Summary from today. So thanks to those people who made contributions. So the benefits of sharing ideas and best practice. Martin took us through the survive, pivot, adapt, thrive, the 3 phases of the actual journey through the crisis. We then talked about evolving business and team structures. So I highly recommend you go and have a look at those 2 articles, because if you're starting to have conversations as we are amongst your leadership team and the wider team as to how are we going to make these things stick, how do we adapt our model to to take on board those things that have actually been beneficial. So top 3 strategies, email me afterwards what those strategies are, and that'd be great.
Well, that leads in, Richard, to an offer that we've got to everybody that's attended today's session. We are able to offer free access for a month to the opening level on MyTrip Online. And what that will do is to give you access to 5 tools and 2 courses. But also there's a discussion board there where you'll be able to share your action points and plans or any questions that you've got with either Richard or myself. There is a dedicated webpage for this webinar series, and a link for that will be in the description to the video when it goes up on YouTube later. So with that, really, thank you very much for attending. The next session is scheduled to be in September, at which point we hope to be in a position where we can return to some form of normality of face-to-face business leader group sessions, which are a slightly different style. They're normally a half-day session. Thank you, Richard. And it's been great doing this webinar trilogy, and hope to see you all face-to-face at some point soon in the next few months.